All right, welcome back, everybody. So hopefully you got a little break between videos there. I'm going to pick up with fragments and run-on sentences and a couple things before we get started. There are occasions in which one might want to use a fragment stylistically, but until you master fragments and understand fragments, I would recommend you not do it intentionally. As a very young writer, I loved fragments. I thought they were stylistically cool, but they can be very jarring. On the other hand, I think that there's a misconception that a run-on sentence is just a very long sentence, which is not inherently true. Some run-on sentences are relatively short, and some very long sentences that stretch for pages are grammatically correct. So let's kind of dive in a little bit more. So a sentence fragment is simply an incomplete sentence. As I mentioned, they are jarring and they call attention to themselves and they can be confusing. So if I just said, against all odds, if I walked up to you and said, against all odds, you'd probably be confused. What happened against all odds? I need to provide more information. He persevered against all odds. Now we know who or what persevered, or what is a relationship to against all odds. In the nick of time. Same thing. A good way to check for fragments is to think about if you walked up to somebody and said in the nick of time, most people would not be sure what you were talking about. Now, in a conversation, if, my friend showed up to a party with pizza right at the last minute, I said, in the nick of time. The context indicates the meaning, so a fragment might be okay. But in this case, I want to include who or what did it, right? What's the subject? The team scored in the nick of time. Now, in this case, both of these phrases add on to that first part. Okay, run-on sentences are really multiple sentences pretending to be one, right? There's a good way to think about it. It's a little bit reductive, but that's how we're going to talk about it. So the game didn't start on time. We spent hours waiting for the players to get on the field. Now, at the outset, this might seem fine. It's not an incredibly long sentence. The problem is we have two different things here, right? If we go back and think about main clauses, subordinate clauses, I have the game didn't start on time. That could stand alone. We spent hours waiting for the players to get on the field. That is an idea that can stand alone. So the easy fix here is to put a period in the middle, and now I have those two complete sentences. The purpose of the assignment was to write an email. I hadn't written many emails before. Again, relatively easy fix, easy way to do it, simply turn it into two sentences. The purpose of the assignment was to write an email. I hadn't written many emails before. Now, we could also use a semicolon, or we could use a comma and a coordinating conjunction, some sort of connecting word. That would be fine too, but this is the easiest way to do it. Now, just like we want to avoid fragments because they can seem abrupt and create confusion in our recipient, in our reader or audience, most people are going to get lost in a run-on sentence, and they may or may not take the time to go back and think about what the meaning was, especially in an email if somebody's skimming through it. So let's just take a moment and talk about active and passive voice. Hopefully this is something you've heard about before, but I do probably once a class have somebody ask me what's the difference between the two. So what's the difference? So just like active learning means you're taking a part in your learning versus passive learning, which is just watching a bunch of videos, right? You could take a course and just watch a bunch of videos, but if you're not doing work, if you're not participating in discussions, you're not engaging the active part. So if I said the report was completed by Martina, okay, that's fine. That's a complete sentence. However, what we have is the subject, in this case, at the end. What we want to do is essentially flip that around, right? Martina completed the report. Now, what you can see is that sentence is getting shorter. It's getting easier to read and easier to understand. I just realized it. See, spelling grammar check. It corrected it to Martian. Martian completed the report. Sorry, Martina. Now, if we look at another example, the presentation will need to be prepared prior to the meeting by the team. Awkward, wordy, not entirely grammatically correct, but I could reword that because it's the team that's creating the presentation. So put the team up front. The team will prepare a presentation prior to the meeting. Now we've saved words, right? Again, if part of what we're looking at is being clear, concise, and efficient, a shorter version is going to be more efficient. So among the other ways we begin to do that, by removing unnecessary adjectives and adverbs and moving from passive to active voice, and now we're creating shorter sentences. We're creating something that's more concise, easier to read, easier for the recipient, right? And I'm not sure if I mentioned this in previous videos, but the easiest thing for an audience to do is to stop reading. And in any sort of business correspondence, whether it's marketing, a report, an email, a text message, the last thing that we want is for a reader to stop reading, because nobody owes us a reading outside of a context like this where, as your instructor, it's my job to read it, right? But nobody else owes us a reading, right? My wife does not owe me a reading. She's kind enough to do it for me, but it's not something that is owed. So let's talk about punctuation as well. And we kind of touched on this with fragments and run-on sentences. But there are a lot of ways in which people misuse punctuation. Now, if you're a person who just likes, hey, I'm just going to use periods and question marks, fine. Throw in a couple commas, good, right? They're free. What I think, and this meme demonstrates it, the unnecessary inclusion of quotation marks around wash hands is a little bit disturbing, because it doesn't mean they should specifically wash their hands. It just means they should do something like wash their hands, which may not actually be washing them. Okay, so things that I would suggest avoiding. Exclamation marks. Strongly recommend that you avoid them. Do I use them? Yes, I do. I will use them sparingly. Give yourself a budget. Per 100 words, you get 1 or maybe 2 exclamation points. That will help you kind of balance it out. If you're going to use an exclamation point, use it to emphasize something. I will get the report to you today. In this case, I would probably still avoid that exclamation point. Avoid all capitals, right? I will get the report to you today. It sounds like shouting, and that's the way that it comes across in the written word. And it's true that you should avoid all capitals in both subject lines for emails and in any other sort of writing, unless you really need to. I will sometimes do it. You'll see it on the Canvas page where I will capitalize words to call your attention to them. The other thing that you do need to capitalize, if it's like all capitalize, are acronyms, right? Because that's how we differentiate. And then the last one, I would avoid multiple punctuation marks. Again, it's a pet peeve of mine, but it has the effect of making the writer look a little bit more juvenile, a little bit less polished, right? In this case, of course, I will get the report to you today. The question mark is confusing anyway, because it's you're making a statement and then ending with a question mark. But I would avoid it, just as I would suggest avoiding rhetorical questions. It's more of a stylistic thing, but I would still avoid a lot of rhetorical questions. And in a nutshell, the easiest way to use, or the best way to use rhetorical questions, is when you know it's a question in your reader's mind and you're going to answer that question right away. Okay. A couple other things. So special cases, dashes. So the long dash is called an M dash. It is basically because of, in the old typesetting days, the dash would take up the same amount of space as an M. They're different from a hyphen. A hyphen connects 2 words, right? So if you look at the top, special cases, dashes, this dash up here in the title is actually incorrect. This should be an M dash, right? This is incorrect. This is a hyphen. Now, a good way to think about them, about M dashes, is that they act a little bit like parentheses. Is it the only way? No, but it's the way that I would recommend you think about them for most of your writing. So think about them a little bit like a parentheses. The team, including the manager, will meet Tuesday is the same as the team, including the manager, in parentheses, will meet on Tuesday. The difference, I would say, at least in my personal view of reception, is that this one amplifies it. It calls attention to the fact that the manager will be there, whereas the second one pushes that down to more of a whisper, if you will. Ellipses. So if you're not sure what ellipses are, they're the three dots, ... I see them in a lot of correspondence, and it's unnecessary most of the time, right? I wanted to go to the meeting, ... but I couldn't make it. Again, this is one of those things that will make your writing seem a little bit more amateurish and not quite as polished. The best way to do it is actually just to split that into two sentences and use a transition word like however, right? I wanted to go to the meeting, period. However, I couldn't make it. That could just as easily be, I wanted to go to the meeting, I couldn't make it. I would strongly recommend that the only time you do use those ellipses, those three dots, is in a quote, right? So if I had a very long quote, I was quoting from a document or a report or a speech or something like that, and I didn't want 5 lines, but I wanted part at the beginning and part at the end, I can use those 3 dots, the ellipses, to show that I have taken something out. And sometimes you'll see those in the squared off brackets. So just a few kind of detail things, but I think going back to these fundamentals, what is a sentence? How do I use a exclamation point? It seems like silly stuff, but in a really short piece of writing, a really concise piece of writing, they call attention to themselves. So, your writing will be stronger by avoiding these things. They tend to be a little bit more like something to lean on, right? Something to help support you. In the same way that a lot of people will use an emoji. And I would say don't ever use an emoji in a professional writing setting. It doesn't come off as professional. A lot of the time, what I find is people who are using emojis could simply rewrite the sentence or think about the context, and it would make it more clear that they're joking or they're sad or whatever the emoji is. All right, so there you go. If you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, recipes, let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you all later.